Hello, welcome to month one of the Rainbow Sampler Quilt Block of the Month. We've got all the fabrics here laid out for month one. Fabric A here will be our white on white essential here with the scroll. Fabric B is our very light gray essential, and then we've got our three purples. Now ladies, we just need to really pay attention to some of the cutting instructions. Some of you have kits that are broken up so that you've got all your month one fabrics into one package, so you'll have 10 separate packages. Others have it like I do, where all your yardage has been cut to how much you need. You will have a little bit extra, but not a lot for like a significant mistake. So really pay attention to your cutting instructions. I will try my best to explain as clearly as I can in the videos what you're going to do if you're cutting it from your month one package or if you're cutting it from full yardage. Okay, so like I said, we do need to be cautious in how we're cutting, but I do want to let you ladies know that I do have one whole kit set aside. Should any of us have a miscut, we will have some extra yardage. It's not unlimited, but we do have some extra yardage that we'll be able to use should there be a miscut. So I don't want you ladies to panic, but I do want you to be cautious. So I'm just going to go through because we have two ways that you've received the kit. So we have, some of you have received the kit, like I said, in monthly packages. So the yardage is all cut up into smaller chunks for each month, or you received it as yardage as a whole. Now, if you've received it as a monthly package for fabric A, B, C, and D, you will have received in month one fat quarters and a fat eighth of fabric E. So that's how you will have received it. If you're cutting from the monthly packages, you're going to cut yourself 2 strips that are 2 3/4 inch of fabric A. You're going to cut yourself 2 strips from fabric B, that's 3.5 inches, and you're going to cut yourself 1 strip that is 2 3/4 inch. From fabric C, you will cut 1 5-inch strip, and you will also cut then 2 that are strip that is 2 3/4 inches. Fabric D, you will cut yourself 2 3.5-inch strips and 2 strips that is 2 3/4 inch. And from fabric E, you will cut yourself 2 strips that are 3.5 inches. If you're cutting from full yardage, we won't necessarily need to cut as many strips. But, okay, so with fabric A, if you're cutting from full yardage, you will want to cut 2 strips that are 2 3/4 inches. But this strip here, 1 strip's going to get subcut to make 16 2 3/4 inch squares. So I've got the squares here. We need 16 squares. From 1 full strip, we can get 15 blocks, okay? So the second strip, we're only going to cut 1 block off of this strip. Then the rest of this strip we're going to set aside because it's going to get used later on in another block, okay? So you will end up with almost 1 full strip left over that we're going to save. Then with our fabric B, if you're cutting from full yardage, you're only going to cut 1 3.5-inch strip, and you're going to cut 1 2 3/4 inch strips. Fabric C, you will cut 1 5-inch strip, and again, you will have left over of this one that we will set aside and use later on, and you will cut 1 2 3/4 inch strips, or strip. Fabric D, 1 3.5-inch strip, and 1 strip that is 2 3/4 inches. And then our last one here, our fabric E, you will only need to cut 1 3.5-inch strip. All the rest of, then you can pack all this fabric up because we won't need it again until month 2. Okay, so I've taken our strips now and I've subcut them into all the squares that are listed. So for fabric A, like I said earlier, we are going to take our 2 3/4 inch strips, and we're going to cut them into 16 2 3/4 inch squares. So that's there. Our fabric B, from the 3.5 inch strips, we're going to cut so that we have 8 3.5 inch squares. And our fabric B as well, we're going to cut so we have 8 2 3/4 inch squares. So there's that. From our fabric C, we'll get 4 5 inch squares from our 5 inch strip. And we're going to get 8 2 3/4 inch squares from our other strip there. Fabric D, we're going to take our 3.5 inch strip. We're going to cut those into 8 squares, so 3.5 inch squares. Then our other strip as well, we're going to get 14 squares that are 2 3/4 inch squares. So there's that. Now what I want to demonstrate here is how I do my subcutting. This with using fabric E here. So I've kept my fabric, as you can see, it's still folded with wrong sides together. I just make sure I line up those selvages nice, and I keep the top and the bottom all nice and flush there. I will find a line here to lay it on so I know that it's straight. So as you can see, I've got this bottom here, and I've lined it up all along that line so I know it's straight. So my first cut that I'm going to do here is I'm just going to cut off that little bit of selvage there, and I'm lining it up again just to make sure that I'm still keeping that all straight. So now I've got a straight edge here and I have a straight edge there. Now this 3.5 inch strip is going to get cut so that we have 8 3.5 inch squares. So now I just can line it up with the ruler, and I ensure then that I still have this flush along that line. Now I'm flush along there. I've got my 3.5 inch mark here, it's flush, and along my 3.5 inch here. So I know that that is all square. So now that cuts me 2, and I can line it all up again here. So that's 4. Six, and my last, I don't know if I'm falling out of view here. Line it up again so that I know I've got a straight edge and a straight edge using that ruler. And I line it up again on here. Now, my habit, I tend to use this ruler here to ensure that I line up. Some people can use this ruler here. They would line it up right here along the edge so that again it's flush here, and then here's my 3.5 inch mark. If I use the ruler on the mat, then that way all I have to do is line up this ruler so that I'm all lined up all along my 3.5 inch, and I can cut and then keep moving over in increments of 3.5. So that's the 2 ways to cut. I just tend to really rely on this ruler when I do my cutting, but either way will work. The real key part is just laying it flush here, and then that way you can cut 2 at a time rather than having to cut only 1 at a time. Now, as you will see, we've got our 8. This is what I have is left over, so it's also going into my save pile. So all of this here, you will see all of these pieces here are my remainders from my full yardage. Remember, I'm cutting from full yardage, so this is what I have left over that I'm going to put aside because I can use some of this in block 2 as well as in my block 10. I'll be able to go back and cut these up as well. So that's my leftovers. Now I have these all cut. The other thing I guess I should have mentioned earlier that's on my mind now as I talk is one of the things that you should always do before you start cutting is you should read all of the instructions. So I went through, I read all of the instructions, and just to become more familiar with exactly what I'm doing now, and I'm a little bit more aware of all the cuts that we're doing. That will also help to ensure that you don't make any errors. So the only other cut we have left is this fabric B. So we need to then cut these 3.5-inch squares. We have to cut them diagonally twice, that we get 32 triangles. Okay, so to do that, again, I am going to line up, and then this way I can line this ruler up so it's going from corner to corner, and I will cut, and then I will do the same thing this way. I'll be able to cut. I'm just going to move this a little bit. It's a little bit awkward. The camera's kind of got me at an awkward spot here. So I'll move it and get it lined up here. And there we go. So I'm going to do that to all my gray pieces so that I'll end up with 32 triangles this way. One of the other things that you could do if you're not fully comfortable in doing that, you don't trust yourself to be able to just go ahead and cut. One of the other things that you could do then is you could draw yourself lines on here. So I've just got this bow and pen. It looks like a mechanical, and I'm just going to draw a line here. It just looks like a mechanical pencil, but it's got like chalk in there. And I'm just drawing myself lines here. So then I would be able to cut. And then if I come apart, then I know where to put my ruler on the other piece. There. But we're going to cut so that we end up with 32 of these. So again, and there we go. We've got our triangles. So, and then once we've got the other two of these ones done, we'll be ready to stitch. You'll see that this piece here is a little bit, it's got a fold in it. Just to be more accurate in cutting my triangles, I am going to iron this fold out before I go ahead and do my cutting. Just that way, with this whole quilt, precision is definitely going to be our best friend. We will want to try and be as precise as possible. It will help us ensure that our blocks end up in the sizes that they are meant to be, especially with these. This isn't always my favorite way to sew. I've definitely sewn with triangles before. There is other methods that we don't actually have to cut these, so that we have our because once they're cut like this, unfortunately now we're on a bias, so it's a little bit more stretchy across this way. So we do have to just ensure that we are precise and a little bit more careful in our pinning, because we now have the bias exposed on the fabric. But there are other ways that we could have sewn these pieces together so that we didn't end up with triangles. There's other techniques, but with this pattern, it is best to kind of do it the old school way with the triangles. So once you get the other two blocks here cut, we are ready to start our piecing of our blocks. We're now on step 3 of the instructions. We need to grab our 3.5-inch fabric D squares and our 2 3/4-inch fabric B squares. And we're going to draw diagonal lines across each of them. There's a couple different ways that you can do that. You could take just your regular ruler and line up from corner to corner and draw your line, as you'll see that I did there. Or there is also this handy little tool, the Quilter's Magic Wand. It has a groove here in the middle. And what you do is you line up that groove again with each corner, and then you draw a line on either side. I kind of like this because this gives us our perfect 1/4 inch, so that everything is precise and accurate, and it'll line up nice and easily. Then you will take your fabric B squares and you're going to match them to your fabric, I believe our C squares, and you're going to put them right sides together. Now I like to just take one pin, and I just like to go and pin each of those across. So you'll see here how I have done all my diagonal lines on both the B and the D squares. What I also want to show you is how we're going to ensure that our 1/4 inch foot here is the 1/4 inch, the exact 1/4 inch that we need. All right, I've got 2 feet here, you'll see. This here is a foot that comes with my machine, and it's called the perfect 1/4 inch foot. And the reason why it's called the perfect 1/4 inch foot is when we're doing a lot of our quilting and whatnot, we use a seam allowance that's called a scant 1/4 inch, which means that it's just a sliver narrower than an actual 1/4 inch. And the reasoning for that is when we put our right sides together, and so we have to flip it out so that we can see both of the right sides out when we're pressing open our pieces. And when we do that, that folding over causes us to lose that sliver. So if we stitched the actual 1/4 inch, we would always have a seam allowance that was actually wider than a 1/4 inch. So if you use a scant 1/4 inch, then that it accommodates for that sliver of fabric or that sliver of seam allowance that is lost when we fold that fabric over. So this is the perfect 1/4 inch foot, and this one here is this is what is also called a 1/4 inch foot that comes with my machine. You'll notice here that there's quite a difference in width from the center point here to here and the center point here to the edge here, and that is that little bit of a sliver. So one of the ways to know if you have the right seam allowance on your foot would be to line it up. As you can see, I can line this one up here when the exact middle of that, and you will see it's just a tad over that 1/4 inch line. So we know that that 1/4 inch is not our scant 1/4 inch that we want. Whereas if I take this one and I line it up nicely in the middle, you will notice that this edge here that I'm going to follow lines up perfectly with that 1/4 inch. So then I know that this is my scant 1/4 inch that I want to work with. If you don't have one of these feet, you don't have to stress. There's a number of different things you can do. Again, I'll see if I can bring this up nice and close to the camera. On this foot, you will see that there's this little bit of a notch out here. That notch out on this foot is actually my scant 1/4 inch. When I line that up, that very slight little notch there does line up. So you may likely have a foot that does that, and that would be your marking. You could go in there with a permanent black marker or whatnot, and you could draw a line there to be able to see it better if that's how your foot is. If not, the other thing you can do is you would be able to line, again, your ruler up with your middle here. So I've got my needle right here in the middle. So I've brought my needle down. Sorry, I should be doing it like this. So I'm just kind of bringing my needle down so it's matching up with this dot here. And then I could, again, put a piece of masking tape along here or something, and then that would also give me my markings. So I know that I'm following at that scant 1/4 inch. So you could run a piece of tape along here. There is also this product here. It's called diagonal seam tape. So it's used for a number of different things. One of the purposes you could do then is run this piece of tape so that this red line again lines up with the middle here, and then this black line is where you would follow your fabric along, and you would have that scant 1/4 inch. So those are just a couple of different tools to ensure that you've got the correct seam allowance, not just for this project, but for any project moving forward. Everything will go together a lot more smoothly, precisely, and line up just as you would like it to. Our next step is to cut apart all of our blocks. So generally I can see where my stitching line is, so I will line up that 1/4 inch seam, or the 1/4 inch line on the ruler with that seam, and I can cut apart. When these are cut apart and spread open, you'll see that we'll end up with 2 blocks with both fabrics. We're gonna end up with 16 of these blocks. And we'll do the same with our smaller blocks here. Cut them apart, and same thing, we're going to end up with 16 blocks like this. We'll press these seams open. I'm just going to point out on this one here, the way when you do your seam along the middle, or your line along the middle there, and your seam on either side, you don't necessarily need to use the ruler. You can just cut along that drawn line, and that will also give you your 1/4 inch seam allowance for when you open them up. Like I said, we're going to press these open. Okay, our next step here is to square these blocks up. When we do these half square triangles, often they're not square, so we do want to correct that so that as we piece our blocks, they are accurate and we end up with that 9.5 inch block that we're supposed to. So you will see that there's a 45-degree angle here on the seam. I have a ruler here that also has the 45-degree angle. I know that these purple ones don't have very much to trim off. They're relatively close to what they already have to be. These need to be trimmed to 3 1/8 of an inch. So I'm lining this line up on the ruler with that diagonal seam line, and I've got 3 1/8 of an inch on each side. And I'm going to cut there. Nope. And then I'll flip the block and do the other side. So even though we may not have very much to trim off on this block, and again, I'm lining everything all up here, what we are getting rid of definitely then is our wings. And you'll see that on here, that we have wings on each of these blocks. Those create extra bulk as we're piecing it, as our piece the blocks all together. And that then again will make it a little bit more difficult to be accurate and precise. So if anything, you do want to trim those off so that we can get as nice of a block and have it pieced together as easily as possible. So there's that. Our smaller ones here. Here we have our B and our C blocks. We want these trimmed to 2 1/8 of an inch. These ones have a lot more trimming to do. Doing it the same way, lining that up, we need it to be at 2 1/8. So I'm just gonna get that lined up. I can cut and trim. Now, some of you may have a rotating cutting mat. This would be a great time to use that. I personally have never gotten comfortable with one of those. I always just feel like it's awkward, so I like to just take my blocks and cut them like this and lift up. For some, like I said, who really like the rotating mat, that's great, and go ahead and use it, because I do know for many that quickens up the process and makes this cutting go a lot more efficiently and quickly. But like I said, I just find it awkward and have just never been able to get used to using one of them. So there's my 2 1/8 of an inch block. Okay, one of our next steps is to take our purple unit 1 blocks, as they're referred to in the pattern, and cut them apart to make 2 triangles. So how to do that is I like to find a line somewhere on my mat. I can use this one here, that I can then line up my block. Make sure you place this the right way so that you've got a corner and a corner going along that line. Then you can run your ruler so that it also runs along this line. And an extra assurance would also be, if your ruler has that 45-degree angle line, you can line it up on what would be the edge of the block. So I've got this lined up here and here, so I know that we're going to get a nice clean cut. And then we've got the 2 pieces. So we'll be cutting all of these apart to make 32 of these triangles. Okay, so our next step is to piece this block. So the easiest thing I do is I take a look at the picture on the pattern and I recreate it, laying it out, especially when we're working with these triangle pieces, because it is almost sometimes feels like you're piecing together a puzzle. So we know that our first step is to add these triangle pieces on either side. So if I lay this out, then I can see that I'm I'm creating the same thing again by laying this out. So what I did was I lined up that corner here and I pinned it and I sewed from here to here. So that gives us that. Okay, so then I'm just going to show you adding on to the second piece. We're going to do the same thing. I am just going to line up those two corners so they're nice and flush on both sides. I can give it a pin to hold it. All right. Oh. And trim my threads, and we can press that open like that. So as you will see, that'll be the first part of our block. All right. So then what you want to do though is you want to go and you want to trim it so that we get those wings off. So I'm going to press that open like that. I did that on both sides. Then I'm going to trim our wings off, and it's going to end up looking like this. Our next step then is to add these purple pieces. So I'm going to grab two of them here, and one will go that way and one will go this way. All right, so that's how it's going to be. So what I did, as you can see here, I've got one side added on, is you want to line up this seam of the purple with the cross section here of the back when you go and put it together. So I'm going to show what I do there. So I'm going to take these two, I'm going to pin my pin just 1/4 of an inch through that seam, and then I'm going to enter that pin right into the top corner of that block, and then I can line this up and I can put my pin through. Now what you'll see that does for me is it lines that up there, and you can see how my pin has gone right through both seams that way. That's going to give me that nice crisp points meeting together there. I'm going to pin that there, and I can line this up to sew. Taking that pin out just right before you get to there will hopefully ensure that nothing shifts and that those seams line up. So when I open it up, you'll see how that seam nicely lines up with that corner. So then I'm going to press this up and open. And then what you're going to want to do is repeat so that you've got it on the same side there. So I'm just going to give this a good finger press just to save us some time here. So I'm going to repeat again. I'll just do it here. 1/4 of an inch down, put that in through the corner, line those up, and as long as I bring that pin up and through there, it should all stay lined up. Pin here, and then I should be able to go and press this nice and flat at the ironing board. The other thing I'm going to do is get rid of those wings, and as you'll see on this one here, I trimmed them off. This block here, when it's all said and done, should measure 2 3/4 of an inch by 5 inches. So from here to here should be 2 3/4 of an inch, and the width here should be 5 inches. So you want to double check those before you proceed to the next step. Okay, so this is the last block that we need to create before we put all the pieces together to create our month 1 completed block. So to do this, first we have to grab the remainder of our purple squares. These ones are going to measure 2 3/4 inch squares, and you're going to want to draw, just trying to find one here where you'll be able to see well. You're going to want to draw a line diagonally across from one corner to the opposing corner on each of the blocks. Then what you'll do with that block is you're going to place it here, and you're going to stitch directly on top of that line, so that when we trim it and press it open, we've got the starting of the block. So you'll do it on the first side, then you're going to place a block on the opposing side, and you're going to line up those corners so that everything here is nice and flush. And here's our diagonal line going across there. So you'll do it first on this side, and then you're going to repeat on the opposing side. You're going to stitch on that line that you drew. Okay. And then you will go and you're going to take your ruler and trim a quarter off or over there. So it's going to be like this. All right. Do you see how I trimmed that 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I pressed over on each side? And then you're going to repeat lining those blocks up on the 2 remaining sides. You want to line everything up so it's nice and flush. Okay, you're going to stitch on that line, and you'll be able to press there, and you repeat on this side, and you'll trim each of those corners. So like I said, that's what you're going to end up with. You'll be able to go the way around. That's what your finished center block will look like. Now we can take the remainder of what we have here. We're going to bring out those 2 3/4 inch squares. And the same thing we're going to do, like I said, it's a good idea to try and lay out by looking at your picture of the block there, and lay it out, piecing it together. So we're going to have that and this, and that'll be on the side and here. And then of course we'll have the bottom. So to do this top here, we're just going to put right sides together and so you'll have that, and we'll pin here. Okay, and so then there's that for the top, and we'll repeat it again from the bottom. Now, if we're adding for the sides, again, we've got purple. What is a good trick here is you're going to take that side. Once again, you're going to pin right here where all those seams attach, or crisscross again to make that point. So that pin will go through there, and you'll pin through that point as well, and you'll line that up. And put that nice and flush, and you'll be able to stitch along. You'll notice as I'm stitching, my 1/4 inch seam allowance is going to go right through all of that where I've pinned, where all the seams are intersecting. That should be exactly where your 1/4 inch goes along, or stitches along, and you'll see how my seam went right through all those intersections. That is what, when I press open, gives me that nice points. So I'm going to add the other piece to the other side. Okay, so I have finished both the top and the bottom rows of these blocks. And as you'll see, I even attached one. One of the tricks though that you want to get for a nice flat block, and for again to try and get all your points to be as crisp as possible, would be nesting. So you'll see how when I pressed, I chose to press these seams inwards into them towards the inner block, okay? And on these ones, I chose to press those seams towards the outer blocks. The reasoning for that is for when we go to add this block on, we don't have both seams facing the same direction. We have these seams going this way and these seams going in here, which will help nest it. When we pin, I tend to feel that if you can pin from the middle out, you will end up with a much more square block. Same thing when you're doing your borders and such. Just anytime that you pin from the middle out one way and out the other way, I feel that everything tends to be a little bit more square. So in this case, we're going to flip this over so we're right sides together. Once again, we've got where everything intersects. So I'm going to put that pin through there. And I'm going to put it through the top point here of that block. So those points then will intersect, and when I'm stitching, my 1/4 inch seam allowance should go right through there. Now what I meant by nesting, if you take a look here, I've got this flap coming this way and that flap going this way. So when I put those seams together, it should almost make like a little X, and then that'll be nice and flat, versus if it was both going this way, we'd have a great big hump and things wouldn't lay nice and flat. So I'll do the same thing here. I'm going to put my pin through a 1/4 inch down. I'm double checking that my pin comes through where those corner, where that corner meets on that block. And same thing, I'm going to put it through where that point is. So those should do that again here. There we go. And when I bring it through, my pin will go through, it'll come out that seam, go in that seam, and it comes out. So we know that it's all lined up. And when my seam or my stitch goes through with that 1/4 inch seam allowance, it should pass right through there. And I'm going to pin same way on this side, 1/4 inch down, double check. Go into that corner and come up. Okay, so now I can stitch across. And just kind of sometimes pull and make sure everything lines up nice. Fabric wants to be up, peeking through, so just make sure. And then here we are, and there's our finished block. Of course, I will press this up. And there will be our finished block. It should measure 9.5 by 9.5. And when I put this across here, I am 9.5 that way, as well as 9.5 this way if I use the ruler on here. I don't know if you're able to see that in the video. But anyways, our block will finish at 9.5, and you will make 4 of these. And once you're done all 4, you are done block 1. So congrats. Thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you guys in February with block number 2. Thank you.